Hello everyone and welcome back to Quickflicks, and today we'll be discussing two different films I saw in the past couple weeks or so. The first film we'll cover is Nobody, and the second one is Godzilla vs. Kong. So let's jump right into it with Nobody.
Who the fuck are you?
Me? I'm nobody.
Nobody is a film made by the people who made the original John Wick and stars Bob Odenkirk as just a normal nobody kind of guy. He has a job, he has a wife, two kids, the average nuclear family, if you will. And one day, when life comes hurtling back at him in a different sort of way, when crime happens to him, he starts to kind of go back on some old habits, if it were. Because you see, kids, Bob Odenkirk plays a guy who used to be part of the CIA or was kind of a professional auditor who was a person that took care of some of the extra stuff, made sure bodies disappeared. And it's because of a certain event that happens in the first act that he decides to go back to his old ways. To be honest with you guys, I don't remember much about this movie. Aside from Bob Odenkirk and a surprisingly fun performance from Christopher Lloyd, this is the most, generic movie I've ever seen. It's also very forgettable, mostly because of the villain. The villain in this movie is just kinda meh. I don't necessarily like the character, I just didn't really have an attachment to the villain. The whole problem with this movie is that it doesn't necessarily have a sense of its own sort of identity. It's kind of stuck a little bit in the previous sort of John Wick style of action, but it doesn't have its full own identity yet. And that's partially due to the lack of characterization of some of the other key players in this whole thing. But if it wasn't for Bob Odenkirk and Christopher Lloyd, this would be a very forgettable movie from start to finish. Bob Odenkirk gives probably the best performance out of this entire movie, mostly due to the fact that he's playing a character that he's never played before, as far as I know. He plays, a guy who used to be a guy that takes out other people, makes sure bodies disappeared, and he's pretty proficient with the action. He does a lot of his own stunts in this film, which is highly impressive, and he does a good job with it, at least. I felt the filmmaking overall is just kind of same. There's not a lot of interesting shots. The action is shot well. There's one scene in particular that is both the best and the worst scene, in my opinion, and that's the bus scene. There's a scene on a bus that you've seen on in the trailer where Bob Odenkirk beats the shit out of these people that are harassing this girl, and it's a good scene. It's shot well, and you get a sense that Bob Odenkirk's character is a badass, but he's also a person that's not necessarily he's still trying to work out the kinks of getting back into the routine of beating the shit out of people. And so, it showcases how vulnerable the character can be, but also showcases his ability to, fight. However, I would say this is also kind of one of the worst scenes in terms of pacing, because prior to the actual fight scene, we get this really elongated slow-mo sequence where the people that get on the bus, these drunk assholes that get beaten up, it's just all slow-mo. And then you get Bob Odenkirk's voiceover describing how he yearns to beat the shit out of these people. And I'm like, this is the only time in the movie, by the way, that there's any sort of voiceover from the character himself. There's no point in this movie outside of this where you get to hear more of his thought process, what he actually thinks of. And I'd say if you remove the voiceover and just kept the slow-mo bit, it would not seem as an awkward buildup, because it's just it's more about what you show versus what you tell. And this scene that leads up to the big brawl on the bus, it just has way too much of both. It shows a lot, but it also tells a lot. And it's just, just cut the voiceover. You get what you need from the performances and the way it's edited. So why the voiceover scene? It just makes no sense to me why there's a voiceover scene in this particular spot when the rest of the movie had none of it. But that's not to say I didn't enjoy this movie. I enjoyed parts of this movie in terms of the action. Again, it's all well choreographed, considering this is from one of the creators of John Wick. And, it's shot decently. And Bob Odenkirk gives a really fun, if not at times dark humor type performance. But at the same time, the story is just not memorable. There's not a single moment in this film that makes me really think of how definitive the film is. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of its own identity, and instead kind of borrows from a lot of other things. And it tries to make it its own, but it's just not meshing altogether, and it just doesn't have anything. There's also a character in this film that Bob Odenkirk talks to through a radio, and they're setting him up. They're not really setting him up to do anything. He's just kind of the voice in the sky, surveying like what all the chatter is and whatnot. And they build up this reveal scene at the very end, but I'm like, there's no significance of this character other than the fact that Bob knows who this person is because they're, communicating on the radio, right? And they've known each other, obviously, but the build-up doesn't necessarily pay off because we don't know exactly the full context of their story, and we don't know, like, why he doesn't want to, like, come out of the shadows in the first place. So his whole reveal in the third act, coming in as part of the cavalry, doesn't make sense either. So it's just, like, there's some things that I wish were, like, better implemented and better written, and it just kind of shows like it's just kind of a fun movie just to go watch. If you think slightly about the plot or about like the characterization of a lot of the villains and whatnot, the villain's a nothing character, by the way, then you're going to be disappointed by the film. And if you're just going in just to watch the action and the fun, sure, yeah, definitely go see it for this, but it's just not worth it to say it's a good movie or a best movie of the year. It's enjoyable, but I don't think it's great, and it had some issues going out of it. So I'm going to give Nobody a C.
Kong bows to no one.
And next up we have the big monkey fight. The reason why I put all my MonsterVerse 4Ks up on this, up on my shelf. And that is because we're going to talk about Godzilla vs. Kong, the ultimate smackdown. Now, for clarification here, I did go see this movie in theaters. I was with my brother, and we were situated in a space that was far apart from other people, and we were wearing masks, we were being responsible. My mother and my grandparents, they were watching it at home through HBO Max, so we have two different experiences. I got to see it on the big screen. They got to see it on their TV. It's not a great TV, but it's a TV anyway. Godzilla vs. Kong, directed by Alex Garland, is about Godzilla, who is rampaging. No one really knows why. And he's pissed for some reason, and there is a group of people investigating it. You have a conspiracy theorist played by Brian Tyler Henry, who is such a terrific actor. I'm glad he's getting a lot of roles. And this role is kind of weird to watch, mostly because of the fact that we now live in a world where QAnon exists and conspiracy theories exist, and some of them have led to some pretty serious consequences, and you just know that certain lines in this movie, like him drinking bleach or washing himself in bleach, was definitely written before the 2020 pandemic. And turns out it was. Originally, this movie was supposed to come out in 2020, but instead it got moved to 2021, which we are now responding to. So the whole line with the bleach thing just kind of comes off as weird. And that's a line said by Millie Bobby Brown's character. We also have the guy who was from Hunt for the Wilder People and also played Russell from Deadpool 2. So he gets a pretty good performance in this as kind of like the guy reacting to everything, to all the crazy shit that Millie Bobby Brown and Brian Tyler Henry are saying in their investigation as to why Godzilla is like rampaging everywhere. And then at the same time, you have this other story that's happening with Alexander Skarsgård in relation to that story, according to like this company called Apex, which is trying to develop some new technology, and so he has to go with the people that are working with Kong to move him from one location to another, but he's using him to try to get into the supposed Hollow Earth. And the Hollow Earth was established all the way back in King of the Monsters, about how like the monsters like move around through the different world. And honestly, the Hollow Earth aspect is probably the most creative stuff I've seen in the Monsterverse. Like the whole thing with like the gravity fluctuations from moving from one plane to the other is pretty cool. One of the things that is kind of disappointing though is that there was not necessarily a huge fight between Godzilla and Kong in that space. Like, could you imagine, like, I know Chris Stuckman pointed this out, and I found it, like, kind of disappointing too, but wouldn't it be cool to see, like, the giant lizard, like, on one plane just use its atomic breath to go on that plane, but it ends up arcing back up because of the, the gravity? Like, what kind of crazy physics could you do with the atomic breath? Or what kind of things could Kong do to, like, dodge and weave through this like gravity fluctuating Hollow Earth? Like, this is a pretty cool area to do a fight scene, and there's like not really a lot of creativity with it. It's just Kong going through this Hollow Earth and just trying to find out, where his home is. And he finds it. He finds his axe, which also has a pretty cool touch. Like, my brother pointed it out. It's like, oh, the axe is like one of the scales from Godzilla. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. It's an interesting thing that he pointed out. Cool. But yeah, in terms of the new MonsterVerse movies, I've kind of become content with the fact that these movies are never going to be like politically relevant, or they're not going to have any sort of social message, or they're not going to have any sort of like political theming or anything like that. They're never going to be like the original Godzilla film. It's just about the monsters, and I'm pretty content with that. The fight sequences between the monsters are also really satisfying, even if they are few and far between different like scenes, right? You have a fight scene in the ocean, which was advertised in a trailer, and that scene was really, really fun to watch. And then you have the scene in Hong Kong, which was also advertised in a trailer. But now I gotta get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen it, then click off the video. But if you have seen it, let's discuss Mechagodzilla. So Mechagodzilla shows up in this movie, which was already something I kind of knew about ever since the end of King of the Monsters. Like when Charles Dance, or whatever his name is, the eco-terrorist from that movie, goes and picks up the Ghidorah head, I was like, okay, they're probably going to use him or use that to reverse engineer some sort of way to create a mecha version of a kaiju. Or a titan, as they're referred to in this universe, apparently. And that's exactly what we got. In this movie, they make this, like, supposed claim that, like, oh, like, because they have, like, 3 different heads, they have to coordinate with each other, so there's, like, this weird symbiotic relationship between the heads that control the entire body. And that's kind of genius, I guess. That's a cool way to, like, make Mechagodzilla into what he is. And this whole new edition with the Ghidorah heads actually is kind of different from what they did in the original Toho films with Mechagodzilla. It's pretty cool. I think a lot of people kind of saw the whole Mechagodzilla thing kind of come to existence, partly because of the fact that in the beginning of the movie, there's like this giant eyeball thing that's kind of like flashing. I'm like, okay, they're obviously setting up Mechagodzilla because of the eyeball. There you go. But to see Mechagodzilla on screen is still really fun to watch. Even if I was like, okay, so this is how they're going to like come together and be like, okay, so we got to work together. Godzilla and Kong have to work together. But they do have a really cool showdown prior to Mechagodzilla escaping King Kong and Godzilla just duking it out in Hong Kong. Like, it's pretty cool. There's even like a fun little Easter egg reference with like King Kong, like on top of a building that is illuminated like the Empire State Building. I'm like, okay, you're cool here. And then, they have that whole fight. It's pretty fun. All in all, I think Godzilla vs. Kong is just kind of a fun popcorn film, I guess. It's just a popcorn film that has a lot of spectacle and action, not a lot of subtext. The human characters this time are not necessarily as forgettable, but I think overall, Godzilla vs. Kong is okay. So I'm going to give Godzilla vs. Kong a B minus. And so, kids, that is the end of today's Quick Flicks. It's probably not as quick as I would have wanted it to be, but yeah, that's my thoughts on these movies. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.